I just like the fact that we're getting back into taking those deep dives. At the beginning of this podcast, we promised that we'd be covering the stuff that no one's willing to touch, and so today we're doing zombies. The type of thing that no one has any. I mean, no one talks about zombies. That's why we got to come
scared.
in.
You know what? You wanted a monster month, and you're getting a monster month, Jacob. I don't know why now you're going to turn around and bite the hand or the brains that feed you, so to speak.
Bite the brain. Really, bite the brain that feeds you.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
So welcome everybody to this episode of the Voyage podcast, where if you haven't picked up by now, we've been slowly inching towards you that we're going to be talking about zombies. Another zombie reference.
That? This was the running zombie because I just threw it out there.
Oh, yours was the World War Z zombie, and not the
or
the Game of Thrones.
Game
of Thrones zombie.
Game of Thrones, that's better. Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake, or how about
28 Days Later?
28 Days
zombie.
Later. Yeah, 28 Days Later.
Honestly,
zombie.
We could fill up a 60-minute podcast. I was complaining about how every other sci-fi has time travel, but if you want to talk about a trope that's been done to death, is probably the zombie one too, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been done to undeath.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. I just keep knocking them out of the park, don't I?
Even when zombies are so pervasive and like overdone that even when a successful TV show happens, it overstates its welcome by like 7 seasons. So
like Walking Dead, is that what you're referring to now?
That's the reference. Yeah. Thanks for catching it.
It was right on the nose that fell off. So now that we've quickly run through
these puns, I think your puns are rotten, Mike.
So we've run through a couple of, whether it's more recent and even some classic examples, but I did want to kind of talk through. So what are, I guess, just some of your, you could say your favorite or maybe classically considered some of the best or the most innovative zombie movies and TV shows. And then we can kind of get into, the real meat of the conversation.
The real brains of the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Something like
that. So I'm going to go with, oh, dang, what's it called now? Oh, no. Wait, no, give me
Night of the Living Dead?
Nope. I'm going to go with
28 Days Later?
The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Okay.
See, that's a joke that you wouldn't get because you're not up on your horror movies the way I am, because that's like voodoo zombies.
All right.
That's a whole movie about like the voodoo.
Illuminate me then, please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. So, the thing about zombies is that they weren't called zombies until George Romero made Night of the Living Dead, right? Like, they were this idea of like corpses coming back to life. They would have been up until like 60 years ago. They would have just been referred to as like ghouls or like revenants. Okay. This idea that we use this language zombie to describe them, that is taken from like voodoo magic, like Haitian voodoo magic stuff, And so there are a few horror movies out there that are actually about voodoo magic, like White Zombie, starring Bela Lugosi. It's an old black and white one that's really actually pretty creepy. But then this one was a Wes Craven flick, The Serpent and the Rainbow. And it's got Bill Pullman. I love that guy.
From
Mr. President. Yep, that's right. Best president in movie history.
Wow.
He gets in the fighter jet. He gets in the fighter jet at the end. Yeah. He leads from the front, Mike. Anyway, it's about zombies, like Haitian voodoo zombies. It's good. It's interesting. Wes Craven's a good horror movie director. That was really just a joke, though. It's not my favorite zombie movie.
You were just trying to, be like,
I was just trying to
make
be
a reference that Mike hasn't heard of.
Yeah, I was just trying to put you in your place.
Exactly. So
put you in the grave.
And one of the I mean, and one of the things that we're going to talk about is how of course, just like any iteration of a vampire movie is going to highlight something different about Dracula, or a different iteration of, in this case, a zombie movie or zombie TV show is going to highlight something like the director or the writer is going to have something specific or unique, hopefully at least, that he or she is going to want to say. And so,
What's
you
your
know,
what's your favorite zombie movie?
I mean, I was trying to go for maybe the ones that I guess you could say are a little bit more relevant. I mean, I put Night of the Living Dead, thinking that you'd want to talk about that one a little bit because that connects
Oh,
to our cabin
absolutely.
in the woods conversation.
I mean, that might actually be my favorite zombie movie. And
Okay.
people would accuse that of being a cliche response, except for the fact that like no one chooses that as their favorite zombie movie. Everyone thinks that it's like important and like revolutionary and like blah blah blah, but everyone has like a zombie movie that's come after the fact.
But we
They
go for more
feel
of the either the
like
gory or
outdoes
the
it.
silly or the
Well,
whatever.
there's lots of reasons. Honestly, this is seriously. There's so many zombie movies out there. Like, pick your poison. But the reality is that like I unironically still think Night of the Living Dead is a very strong contender for the best zombie movie ever made. Not just because it's historically important for the genre, but because it's really, really good. Like, I mean, it's just that black and white that it's shot in, the actual story of it and the characters in it and the way that it ends. It's got kind of a twist ending that is really poignant. Um, it's it's a great flick. It's like a really, really good flick. And I think everything else after it is, either just remaking it or trying to like overdo it, right? Like trying to up the ante. And like, hey, those movies are fun too. I like those movies, but like yeah, man. I mean, it's quality stuff.
So, I mean, the ones that I at least put down that, and it's also the ones that I'm most familiar with because, again, you can, as you've been very, as you're very quick to do, you can roll your eyes and say, well, I'm just a noob, right? I don't, I'm not as up on the horror movies or the monster movies as you are. So, I mean, like the ones that I'm most familiar with, I mean, I did watch The Walking Dead right when it first came out. And yeah, I
All the
sort of
way
have
through the
grown
end, right?
less. I actually have not seen the last maybe one or two seasons. I can't remember. I think it might be something I might go back to.
They even lost you, Mike, and you'll watch anything.
Okay, like I don't know why you're coming after me like this, but sure. But anyway, I prefer to think of it as loyalty. But anyway, we'll keep going. Because and yeah, you're gonna love my next reference so I think the Game of Thrones zombies are a good one to mention. And the reason why I included
they're really good.
The reason why I include The Walking Dead as an example and the Game of Thrones example is because they play very specific roles. Okay, that's also part of it. But one of the things that, like I was saying, every director, every writer is going to use the zombie trope or the zombie story to say something different. The real story in The Walking Dead is that the zombies aren't the enemy, people are the enemy, right? That's like, if you're going to take one thing away from The Walking Dead is like the real enemy are the other people, and this is the circumstances in which that sort of brought it out of them, right? So it's kind of the whole social contract gets ripped to shreds. And so then how do, people really survive? Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's why, like I said, the Walking Dead is a good example to bring up because in some ways it tries to kind of turn the zombie idea on its head by saying the zombies aren't the enemy, the people are, right? They're just like a mechanism that brings this out of other people. And we can get into how nihilistic it is and how like how very cynical it is and all that stuff. That we can certainly talk about that.
Sure.
The reason why I wanted to bring up the Game of Thrones one, and Game of Thrones is even kind of on the nose about this as they get closer and closer to that final confrontation with the White Walkers, with the zombies, is that these are more than just these people are dying and they're going to kill other people. Is that this is like it's the undoing of creation. It's a very like, and again, they're all sort of apocalyptic stories, but it was the almost like these are like upending of the cosmos into chaos. It was the cosmos to chaos.
No, there's what makes the Game of Thrones White Walker zombies kind of unique is their kind of magic based reality. And as
Yeah.
such, they're coming like the kind of flavor of that zombie apocalypse is one that is kind of like ontological, right? Like
Mhm.
apocalypses that happen in other, fictions and platforms and things like that, they're always apocalyptic. And it's always about the undoing of society and the reaction of society to its own undoing.
Mhm.
But there's something that's kind of like deeper in the Game of Thrones apocalypse
Yeah.
version of the scenario because it's basically this like magic curse reality thing. So it's not just an accidental disease or some
Yeah.
kind of mysterious asteroid. It's not happenstance. It's not like
It's not
uh,
materialistic. It is actually
it's got
accepting.
agency. It's got agency.
Yeah.
It's like the zombies in Game of Thrones have more to do or like more in common with like the nothing in the Neverending Story
Yeah.
than they do with like your typical zombie fare in like a more traditional zombie
Well,
flick because
and
those
it's
that's more like cosmic nihilism. That's more
yeah.
like the universe doesn't care about you kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Whereas Game of Thrones is like, no, there's actually like this evil
It's an
force,
intention. Yeah, it's
yeah, that
intentional. Like you said,
wants
there's
to wipe
agency.
out.
There's the big bad, who wants to get rid of any sort of, cosmos. It wants to all be disorder. And so that's where and it kind of it reminds me of another conversation that we've had separately. People have sometimes talked about this where they'll ask the question, how can Indiana Jones still be skeptical after everything he's seen? And yet the start of the Indiana Jones is like, he's still like, I'm not so sure, whatever. Because
Mhm.
it's like, after Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's like, you should be willing to accept anything after what you've,
You would
gone
think,
through.
yeah. Well, he
You'd think,
technically didn't
well,
see anything because he was blindfolded,
well,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's the
But
answer.
but
It's
I've
not.
had a similar thought when it comes to the world of Westeros, where it's like you're living in this world where you are seeing magic pretty much all the time. How is there room for anybody left to be skeptical in that world? And yet you'll still have characters who are like, oh, I'm not so sure, I'm blah blah this or that. And it's like,
Mhm.
and so it's always
So
funny to me.
almost
There's always this sort of like this
the
schizophrenia when it
devil
comes
well,
to
the devil doesn't exist, right? Like,
uh
in the Game of Thrones context, I think it's really it's less of like a materialistic skepticism and more of a
mm,
spiritual skepticism, you know?
yeah.
Because, like, the fantasy world of Game of Thrones is so cynical about fantasy as such that even though it does have magic, the people who live in it, most of them don't experience magic. That's one of the charms of the show is that, like, its magic is kinda lightly leavened in throughout it, you know? It's very
Mhm.
kind of, like, gritty and down to earth, which is a good part of its atmosphere. But, um but even people who do know that magic exists, they don't think that, like, evil exists or that there's like an apocalyptic force of evil that's out to, like, destroy everything, right? So it's
Yeah,
like
or
a
that evil just resides in people and there's no sort of like spiritual, like you said, agent behind evil in general
mhm.
too. So you actually touched on too that I did think it was worth having is that, just like you kind of fall into two different areas when we were talking about time travel, where it's like it's either this or it's this basically. Well, when it comes to zombie stories, you basically have two origins, right? You have the like virus, kind of like, it's some sort of sickness, some sort of materialistic
Yeah.
cause,
Mhm.
or you have the somewhat quasi spiritual cause. Because I can even remember, and I can't remember the title of it. Was it maybe it was the Zack Snyder one, where it's like the people are coming back from hell to inhabit, or demons are coming back from hell to inhabit
Oh,
these people,
the tagline is, "When
something like
hell
that.
overflows, the dead will walk the earth," or something
Yeah.
like that,
Okay. So you
which
get
is
this
a
sort of quasi
pretty
spiritual.
metal, tagline for a movie. When there's no more room this is how it goes. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Um, which is honestly, from a Christian perspective and, like, the heroine of hell, that's a very kind of, like, weird
Like the day of
statement
the
to make.
crucifixion too, like the day of the
Yeah.
crucifixion where it says even the people left their graves and stuff.
Oh,
But
I'm not trying to,
yeah,
like I'm not
no,
trying
I
to,
know
like,
you're
make it I'm not trying to bring it into the mud,
no, no,
Mike.
no, but no,
Uh,
but yeah,
but it's just like I'm just saying anyone who writes the line, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth," probably doesn't have a lot of, like, deep Christian theological backgrounds. Like,
no.
and I'm
That's
not
why I
saying
said
they
quasi
should.
spiritual,
Yeah.
but yeah.
It's a
But
pretty
no, like
metal
I
line,
said,
though.
you've got this, like, those are basically your two options. Now, we've probably tended a lot more towards the kind of physical material because that's what makes it quote unquote more realistic. But I think the fact that, like I said, you can kind of fall into one of these two camps and go back to the references that we made. Walking Dead definitely steers more toward the, it's an illness, it's like the materialism, whereas Game of Thrones, it's very much the magical kind of route. And that's why, like I said, those two examples, I think they contrast each other, even though, as you know, they both are basically zombies. They're both trying to destroy the earth, in a sense.
I would kind of nuance those categories and actually say that there's kind of three categories at play here because like
Okay.
the first category is disease, medical malpractice, radiation, right? Human science run amok, whether it's medicinal science or some other type of like
Oh, like I
weaponized
Am Legend
science.
too. We didn't even talk about I
Yeah,
Am Legend, but yeah, that's another good. Here
right.
you've got some more fast zombies in I
That's
Am
true.
Legend.
I actually kind of forgot
Yeah.
about I Am Legend. We'll have
Yeah.
to talk about that. But like,
Especially since they're gonna have a sequel, I guess, too.
are they? Well,
Yeah.
the book, it's based on a book by a really, really great author, Richard
Oh,
Matheson.
is it? Yeah.
Can you believe it?
What is a book?
And
Yeah.
the movie is very different from the book too. Can you believe
Okay.
that one? But
Yeah.
that's been remade many times. There's a Charlton Heston version of I Am
Mhm.
Legend. There's a Vincent Price version of I Am Legend, and then there's a Will Smith version of I Am Legend. So, hmm. But
Hmm.
I'm just kidding. I like Will Smith. But like they're all very different from each other too. All three of those
Mm.
movies take the concept and but I'd say the latest one with Will Smith is the one that's like the most removed from the book, whereas the Charlton
Mm.
Heston and Vincent Price versions are pretty similar to the book, or at least take a lot of cues from it. That one, just to go into like the basic story of that, which I think this is still at least true of the Will Smith one, but it's different. The Will Smith one's just so different in flavor from the first two versions and the book, because in that one he's in a suburb of a big city. And so it's like 50 suburbia because the um, book was written in the 60s, right? Maybe early 70s. Pretty sure it was the 60s though. And he's a doctor and he is trying to find a cure for zombieism. And the zombies are intelligent, right? Like the zombies are actually
Yeah.
they're more like well, actually, they're kind of quasi-vampiric, right? They are
Mm.
undead, but they are intelligent undead, which is reasonably rare. Not very
Well, that's just it,
often.
is like, because actually one of the things that I kind of had, it was expecting this conversation to go down was, um we talk about this idea of the uncanny valley when it comes to like different things that scare us as human beings, is that it has to kind of fit in this area of it's like us but enough unlike us that it makes us uncomfortable, or like I said, scares us. And you definitely get that with with the zombies, where they're obviously a lot like us because they were us, but they have lost this essential part of their humanity, right? And we would say is the rational cognitive function part of it, but they've
Mhm.
kept the more animalistic part, which is why they're always trying to eat people or eat brains and all that.
Yeah.
And that's
Or think about the
obviously where
fungus
the
zombies and the cordyceps zombies in
oh
Last
yeah,
of
we talked
Us.
to oh yeah, we didn't
That's
even talk
very
about Last of Us yet.
we
I mean, we have in
dude,
an
there's
old
so much
episode.
zombie content. You
That's
could
right.
have like 5 episodes of just
I
zombie
honestly, I had
referencing
completely
zombie
left my
content.
mind until you mentioned it now. Like I couldn't, I did, and
You
we've done 2
suggested
episodes on The
zombies and
Last
you've
of Us,
completely forgot. Yeah, we've
and I
done
forgot about The
no
Last of
less than
Us,
2
but
episodes on it.
we need
Um,
season 2 to come out. Yeah.
yeah, I'm be pretty here for it. See where they go with it. But where it's this kind of animalistic or kind of almost quasi robotic or hive mind type reality going on with those. There's actually
Yeah.
a lot of different flavors of zombies in some ways. What makes the I Am Legend zombies, especially, it's been so long since I watched the Will Smith movie. I'm trying to remember exactly like how they're portrayed in it. Are they? They're not intelligent, really, are they? In
I
the Will
mean,
Smith movie, I'm pretty sure they're
you get a sense of that towards the end,
by
but
the
you
very
really don't get
end.
the
Yeah,
impression. You don't get that impression like leading up to that final
most of the
confrontation in the
movie,
Will Smith one. Yeah, like
yeah,
I almost remember
they
it was
look like
almost
regular
jarring to
zombies
me.
almost. Yeah,
it was jarring to me when I saw it because I come in expecting, at least from my understanding, the typical zombie of, mindless.
Mhm.
And then when you start to see that, and it almost becomes a break in continuity for me because they are portrayed as, you
Well,
don't get
because
that
at the
sense of,
end, it's they're like almost like caveman level intelligence, right? Like they're not like hyper
yeah,
intelligent, but they're like this kind of like, oh, there's like something there, like, oh, there's some kind of intelligence to it, right? And there's a little bit
yeah.
of a
And you,
back and
you
forth.
actually get an even stronger sense of that in the alternate ending where you have like the one kind of like, I guess, main bad guy zombie,
Yeah,
and he like
he's almost
sees
like
his
the
like
leader
mate.
zombie or something.
Well, that's just
Yeah.
it. Even the sense of having a leader was like, and you get this in
In and of
what's the
itself,
new,
yeah, is more human than most zombies
having a
tend to be.
hierarchy, which, yeah, I mean, you're getting closer to what we would call, more human. Even though, yes, of course, there are hierarchies in the animal kingdom. I'm not trying to I mean,
Yeah,
obvious,
yeah.
but
But I get what you mean.
so like I said, it was almost jarring for me because I came in with the expectations of, what it's the mindless, like, you know, figures
Mhm.
that just try to eat and stuff. And yeah, there was a little bit more of that there. And like I said, they kind of almost take this hard turn towards the end. Maybe if I had been paying closer attention, I would have seen more of it in the earlier parts of the movie. But
I don't know.
like I said,
I should
definitely in
rewatch
the
it at some point.
you get a sense of, like I said, even relationship in the alternate ending, because like I said, you have the kind of like big main bad guy,
Mhm.
monster, and then it's like his mate sort of that Will Smith
Well,
was sort of testing on, trying to heal, trying to give the cure to.
so here's the thing though. In the other versions of I Am Legends, the book and the movies are closer to it. They make I mean, we're talking about like truly intelligent zombies, right? And so these are really old movies and it's a really old book, so I guess I'm not going to really try to hide too many spoilers from this. But they are really
Mm,
good stories. So take it with a grain of salt if you guys want to go not know this, but they're a your first introduction to the zombies in these movies is depending upon they're all a little different. All three of these versions of the story are a little different. But I'll just go with the book. In the book, like they talk. Those zombies, like
mm,
they actually retain like memories. They're they're
mm.
um they're really kind of like uh just evil versions. Like evil kind of like cannibalistic dead quote unquote versions of who they were before. And so they've it's like your neighbors have just become like super malicious. Your neighbors have become
Mm.
cannibalistic malicious. Like
Yeah.
and so they also they don't like they are zombies in the sense that like they don't really like they need to stay out of the sun. So there's like a vampire element. In
Mhm.
fact, when Richard Matheson was writing the story, Night of the Living Dead hadn't come out yet. So he's writing a
Mhm.
zombie story, but he doesn't have like the modern idea of what a zombie is directing him. So his zombies are actually much more related to like the kind of like folklore of like European folklore of like the undead, like the kind of ghouls
Mm.
and revenants that I was referencing, which shares a common trajectory with like vampire folklore. And so
Yeah.
in that regard, he actually has them only able to come out at night. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's as much a vampire story as a zombie story, but it's about like hordes of the undead roaming the streets. So it feels more like a zombie story than a vampire story, but it kind of
Yeah.
hits both. It kind of hits both points.
Well,
Anyway, they
and
can
this
talk, they remember him, they try to lure him out, they try to trick him. And then eventually
man.
he meets a girl who is another survivor, right? But then the twist is that she's not a survivor. She's actually just a new ploy by the zombie horde to get him to come out of his house. So they're so
Mm.
intelligent that they can go and like make up themselves and try to hide
Mm.
the fact. She's like a high functioning one of these
So
because some people are like they're so gone, they're like depraved, but she's still like able to like present as a human, so to speak.
so
So
it's like a zombie Turing test. It passed
it
the
is. It's the
it's like
she
it's like
passes
a
the zombie Turing test,
or
but
the
eventually,
anti-zombie Turing test. Yeah.
yeah.
The human Turing test.
But here the whole story, the whole arc of that story though, is eventually he's the only human left. And what he comes to see by the end of the book is that the zombie hordes who have retained this level of like intelligence, things like that, are actually recreating society. They're actually falling back into, and so like he spends his days going around killing these people, right? Because
Who's
they're
the
evil
real
zombies.
monster?
That's it.
Who's
Yeah,
the
that's
real monster?
the reason
Yeah,
why
it's
the title is I Am
gotcha,
Legend.
yeah.
No, the title is I Am Legend because by the end of the book, he's the mythological creature, the evil human that comes out in
Yeah.
the day and hunts you. It's like an inversion of the monster trope.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. It's a really interesting take on, because from
Yeah,
a
no, it's
when
especially
you
back in the 50s when it was written too.
well, it raises questions of like being made in the image of God and things like that, and what,
Or fallen humanity, you could even say.
or even
right?
fallen humanity or whatever, and what our place in that world is. I mean, it's a kind of cynical take, that book doesn't have a happy ending. Okay. It doesn't have an unhappy ending, I guess, but basically he kind of like acknowledges that like he's not meant for this world, like this world has like moved
that's kind
past
of got a
him.
Christian take to it, I guess, right?
There's something to it. Yeah, there's something to
Yeah.
it. I don't know. It's kind of, you can
No,
almost talk about it from like an apocalypse, like at the end of days when like everyone's like an apostate and a reprobate, and all you have left is just like your desire for Christ to come back and like, leave this world kind of thing. So
Yeah.
you could kind of make a parallel with that, and the movies are similar to that trajectory.
Okay.
So it feels very different from the Will Smith's one. You'll
That
uh,
one, yeah, it's more like a monster
that one's
action movie than
that
it
one's
is a,
yeah.
like
As
it's just more of
such,
an
it kind of
action.
loses what makes the actual story kind of special, in my opinion. But
Uh-huh.
it has its moments as just like a kind of schlocky zombie action flick.
So
Before we move on though, that was the longest tangent ever. No, that was the
Yeah,
longest tangent
yeah.
ever, because I was about to say there's 3 types of categories. And we never, that was
Oh,
the
that's
first.
right. Yeah.
Yes. We've just been
Oh,
going
yeah,
on
I
and on and
just
on about
ugh.
this first category of like medical
Yeah.
zombies. I'll make this super quick because we can just move on to what you want to talk about next. But then you
Yeah.
have unknown zombies. So there's a lot of zombie movies where it's like, we don't know why the dead are coming back to life. They're just like coming back to
Yeah.
life, right?
That's
And
okay,
so
yeah.
that's kind of like a existential, like, you don't know as much as you think you do.
Uh-huh.
You are not master of this world, and
I
you're stuck.
mean, not that we don't need to quibble, but I would probably fit that in the quasi-spiritual. If you're thinking like material
You
versus like, I
could.
would say it sort of fits in. Now, of course, obviously in those types of zombie stories, they could figure it out and it'll end up just being a germ or end up being, a disease. And obviously
Yeah,
then it would shift back
asteroid
over
or
into the
something.
it would shift back over into the A story and not
Well,
the B
there's
story.
probably
But
like a 3-circle Venn diagram, but they're not like overlapping circles. It's like a ring, 3 rings, where you have
okay.
the medical human created zombies. Next to it is we don't know what happened zombies, and then on the other side of that, there's the evil magic zombies,
No,
right?
you have to have a meet in the middle for the alchemist zombie, like because that's the one where you get the magic, the physical, and the human agent. So you got to have one meet in the middle for sure. But
Okay, what's an alchemist zombie? What are we talking about here?
oh, I
Like
was
Frankenstein,
just
maybe?
trying to combine all 3 of them. I didn't have
Oh,
like a
okay.
example. I was just saying
Is
like
that where they
be,
meet? Okay.
yeah, because then you have the you
You
have
could
the
put
agent, you have the
I might have
magic,
stumbled
and
onto
you have the
something.
physical
You
stuff.
could put
Hey,
Frankenstein right in the middle there, because
that's
that's
an
kind
elk.
of like
Yeah.
that's like all 3 of those like combined kind of
For
thing.
sure, yeah, because you've definitely got the undead part of it. You've got the human agent, and it's a
The
prideful,
Frankenstein,
nefarious,
how
and
he actually makes it happen is a mixture of science and occult. Of course, in like the 1700s and early 1800s, where that book is taking place, there probably wasn't like a strong distinction between science and occult. But he's as much an alchemist as he is a scientist in Mary
and
Shelley's
see
book. Anyway,
now we can't do a Frankenstein episode, right? Because you've already
no way, dude.
you've already
Next Halloween season, because we don't have it scheduled for this month. But next Halloween season, there's going to be a Frankenstein episode, and it's going to be referencing AI, artificial intelligence, and
boy.
Frankenstein. Yep.
Maybe throw in some time travel. There's got to be a Frankenstein time travel movie in there somewhere. You'll be able to find it. I'm sure you'll find it.
I have ideas.
Oh, are you gonna write the movie? Is that
No, no, I
no?
think I think I could make those. I don't have like a explicit time travel Frankenstein movie in mind, though it makes you wonder if there's not one. But there is. I could make it happen. I could make connections. You'll just have to wait till next year, Mike.
I guess so. Yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat over here. All right, so we've kind of gone through it, and you've touched a little bit on where this conversation I wanted to go eventually. We've gone through a bunch of, or we've got did a little bit of a, I guess you'd say, a deep dive into some examples from pop culture. You know, we did talk about The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones a little bit, but then I Am Legend as well, and I did allude to this question that I first want us to talk about, which is why are zombies scary? Now, I mentioned the uncanny valley, which is this whole kind of idea. You can Google it if you've never heard of it before, but it's basically that something is enough like us, but also enough unlike us where it makes us uncomfortable. And that's where kind of the fear lives. That's where so much of the, subject of scary stories sort of is taking place. And zombies are definitely right there because they, of course, they share that they were human, or, they still have that human, like we have that expectation, but something important has been taken away. They're enough unlike us to kind of scare us too.
I think that's a fair point that you do get into uncanny valley stuff. Um, but where I would go with that is that another big theme about zombie stories as such is that they are a mirror to us, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
basically, a famous zombie movie is George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And then obviously, Zack Snyder did that remake in the 2000s. But the first one came out in the 70s. And in that movie, one of the plot points of it is that the humans go to a mall because the mall has
Hmm.
everything. You can
Yeah.
survive at a mall well. But
That's of
all the
course the
zombies,
big.
yeah, and they think they're cool. It's
Yeah.
like,
Go
"Oh,
ahead.
we're gonna go to the mall," but then all of a sudden, all the zombies start coming to the mall too, and they're all like, "How do they
Yeah.
even? Why are they coming to the mall?" Kind of thing. And the idea is that
Mm-hmm.
like the zombies are just like performing their habits, and so when the zombies lose
We've
their
all been
humanity,
programmed. We're
all they
all
have is
zombies. Yeah.
their behaviorism, like their
Yep.
habits, and so it's a commentary on like consumerism.
It's pointing the finger
Basically,
back at us. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Exactly.
like, and a lot of that movie is just, poking fun at zombies doing like mundane things walking around a mall, because, and we're supposed to see ourselves, right? And so
Hmm.
this is not uncanny valley, but I do think that it is kind of playing in the ballpark what you're talking about because it's like it's a way for us to look at ourselves. It cuts through to us because it's taken away all the facade, it's taken away all the ego, and all you're left
Hmm.
with is just what it looks like. And we all just look like
Well.
zombies, and, in the 21st century, a zombie movie should just have everyone, like, with their, like, face in their phones. Just, like, walking the
Mm,
streets, just, like,
yeah.
zoned out into a phone
That's
kinda
the
thing.
boober zombie movie, is
Yeah,
what you're.
that's
It's
yeah,
like.
that's what a
Uh,
zombie movie would, if we were doing the same type of social
um.
commentary.
Well, and but even to that end, because to go off of the social commentary thing, we've already talked about how, and not that this was unique to The Walking Dead by any means, but one of the big things about the zombie movie motif is that it's when the social contract is ripped up, when the societal constructs are torn away, what are we left with as human beings? And I mentioned the whole thing about how it's like, Walking Dead is basically saying humans are the real monster, humans are the real enemy. And it's the same idea of they're enough like us, right? Because they're still humans and they still have some sort of like, rudimentary government maybe set up or whatever, but they're enough unlike us because of the societal like constructs that are stripped away. And that's where the fear comes in, right? What happens to the human when? And so it still lives in that kind of fear uncanny valley area. The uncanny valley thing isn't like contradictory to, oh, it's
Mhm.
giving a social commentary on consumerism or the social construct. It's more like that's where that's why they're the subject of fear. Does that make sense?
No, and there's also it's an it's because there's kind of two subcategories of zombie movie that's talking about kind of like this kind of social commentary stuff. One has humans. Oh, humans are the bad guys, right? So rip up the social contract, like you're saying,
Yep.
and what you see is humans. to use some Freudian terms, like the super ego goes away, right?
Mhm.
The civilizational facade that keeps us all in check disappears, and we all revert back to like barbarism, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what you're referencing, right? But then there are some zombie movies like you ever seen like Return of the Living Dead? That's a comedy zombie movie
Is
actually
it the
from the
more recent
80s.
one on Netflix? Oh, no, this isn't
Well, it
the
came out in '85. It
okay,
was written by one of the I think it was Dan O'Bannon, who I think did
okay,
Alien, like Ridley Scott's Alien. That guy, I
okay.
can't remember if he wrote Return of the Living Dead or if he directed it. He's affiliated with in a big way though, I think. But it's actually he co-owned or someone co-owned the rights to Night of the Living Dead with George Romero. And George
Mhm.
Romero went on and did his series of films, follow up with Dawn of the Dead and then Day of the Dead, stuff like that. Goes on a few more. But like this guy, he still had rights to it too. So he creates his own sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And it's called Return of the Living Dead. And
Mhm.
it's not anything like Night of the Living Dead, but it's still a zombie classic in its own rights. However, warning, it's pretty salacious. It's not
Mhm.
exactly the most wholesome film you'll ever watch, but it is another one of those examples of a zombie movie where the zombies retain intelligence to some extent. And so I'll
Okay.
give you an example. Like these kids get trapped in a cemetery and they get trapped at like the morgue attached to the cemetery. And meanwhile, like the zombie apocalypse is happening around them. And they manage to get a phone call out to the police. But when the police and the ambulance show up, all the zombies like jump out and kill the police and the ambulance people immediately. And then like pick up the receiver and they're like, send more reinforcements kind of thing. And so they actually like are telling the humans to like send more humans to them kind of
Oh,
thing.
yeah, sure.
So it's an example of intelligent zombies doing things. But here's the thing: those intelligent zombies are barbaric, right? So in other
Mhm.
words, what we had just talked about was a lot of zombie stories talk about how like the human characters in those things, the zombies don't have personalities. They're just like a phenomenon that brings out the worst in humanity. There are some zombie movies where the zombies are just like the worst of humanity. So it's like the
Mhm.
zombies represents the worst of humanity, and it's the humans that are also still intelligent trying to fight off these kind of like
Yeah.
dregs of humanity. In which case, those types of stories are more like the zombies represent our id. The zombies
Mhm.
represent our passions, you know. And so you have like the human survivors actually taking on a little bit more of a noble quote unquote because
Yeah.
the people are not noble in Return of the Living
Mm.
Dead, but they represent like the upper, the rational, the intelligent, the
Mhm.
from a Christian perspective, like the image of God stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and the zombie hordes are like the masses of like humans that are just following their passions and things like that.
Mm.
In this case, those passions mean eating brains, which Return of the Living Dead, that's where that comes from. That whole meme
Sure.
of like brains, brains, brains,
Yeah.
that is born in Return of the Living Dead. That's the
Okay.
movie that coined that.
Mm.
The more you know.
So so that's kind of part one of the why are zombies scary. Part two is because obviously they represent death, right? I mean, they're called the undead, or you've said the Night of the Living Dead. Like it's this whole idea of, and then they're dead people that rise up again. And now it's the idea of that in one way, we in like modern culture, we can kind of like sequester or compartmentalize death, and we can keep it in a box and keep it away. But here it's actually pursuing us, right? Even if it is slowly pursuing us in some cases. Um,
Mhm.
it's slowly inching towards us. And isn't that the great metaphor, right? For this idea of what are we afraid of? We thought we could keep it contained. We thought we could keep it, kept away or kept aside. And yet it keeps kind of slowly, incrementally inching towards us. And
If
we have to look at it in the face, right? We have to look at the decay right in front of us. We have to look at, so that's again where it's like, why is this such a lasting or such a, yeah, just prominent, kind of story.
I'm gonna go ahead and coin 2 labels for these types of trajectories in a zombie movie. The first one being "We Are the Monsters." That's the
Hmm.
one where the zombies are the backdrop that we have to look at.
Yep.
The second one is so the first one I said was we are the monsters. The second one is the monsters
Mhm.
are us. Okay.
Mhm.
So the second trajectory is when you look at what the zombies are doing, you see us. Like, oh, they
Mhm.
are supposed to be us. When you go into the monsters are us type films, I think it's a really good analogy for what you just said, which is to say, you can see them slowly like creeping like basically if they represent our passions, if they represent like basically the sin that consumes us and
Mhm.
self-perpetuates like a virus and things like that throughout humanity, um
Yeah.
then when you have movies where you have sane rational humans looking at these like barbaric hordes of zombies, I think that to some extent, that's kind of the Christian in this world, right? Like, and
Mhm.
what we're really supposed to do to get all cheesy with it is we have the zombie vaccine and we're supposed to go out into the hordes and
Ah.
like make more humans out of the
We're Will
zombies,
Smith and
right?
I Am Legend
We're
in the
Will
movie,
Smith
just in
and
the movie, just in
whoa,
the
bring
movie
it back.
version.
Way
Yeah.
to circle it back. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
pretty
Yep,
good.
exactly.
We're all Will Smith, everyone.
Or we're Ellie from The Last of Us, and we just need our brains taken out. Is that kind of the to go Last
Well,
of
if you
Us on
really
us?
want to turn
Since
Ellie into a Christ figure, then she is the Christ that sacrifices so that the world can
oh
become
hey,
not
just give
zombies
a teaser.
anymore.
You got to go back to our Last of Us episode,
Or
right?
just go check out episode 6 or something like that.
It's six. No, yeah.
It
It's
is.
the
I know
save
that
the whole
because I'm
world and
editing
lose
all
your
these.
soul.
Yep, that's
Save the
yeah,
whole
there
world
you
and
go.
lose your soul. Yep. But
No, that's
anyway,
the
so
next
yeah.
one. That was the last one. That was the last
No,
one, you're right.
the
Yeah, no,
episode
you're
6
right.
was the
You're
long
right, you're right.
time. That was
Yeah,
episode
yeah,
3.
yeah. That's the
So,
gay
all right.
zombie episode.
Okay. Your words. Um
Okay.
so we've got but again, yeah, cuz you make the connection clear, and it's not going to be made as clear in the actual zombie movies, but in the same way that death is pursuing us, death is chasing us, well, death is just the result of sin. So it should look like sin, whether it's the, societal sin of consumerism or, whatever the case is, but it still is this idea of it is slowly pursuing us, plus we can't avoid it anymore. We have to look it in the face. But it doesn't just mean the death of the individual, right? In most of the zombie movies, you have this sort of death of culture that takes place. And it could be a purging, right, of a bad part of culture, like you kind of mentioned with the consumerism part of the
Mhm.
Romero version. Um, or in some ways, people see it as the superficial societal conventions that are finally stripped away because of this catastrophe that happens.
Well,
And like I
we're
said,
much
maybe there's
more
some.
we're
Yeah,
much
go
more in the
ahead.
track of the We Are the Monsters side of things now. The We Are the Monsters side of things, sometimes the humans that, so the zombies are just a phenomenon, an excuse, some kind of natural disaster event
Mhm.
backdrop to study human nature.
The
And so
catalyst,
in
yeah.
yeah, catalyst. And so you've taken the facade of civilization away, and humans can still choose to be civilized. But most of the
Mhm.
time, these zombie shows or movies depict them as breaking apart into factions, a few of which try to keep civilization alive, but most of which
Mhm.
revert back to a much more, kind of
A
tribal
barbarism, like you said. Yeah.
barbarism. Yeah, like and the culture doesn't matter anymore. It's just survival.
Mm.
Like, who cares about beauty? It's utilitarian through and through. Like,
Mm.
who cares about retaining music or whatever? Like, we
Well,
just need to like find the next meal, even if I have to kill that guy to get it, kind of thing.
and this is so this is actually go back to why I wanted to bring up the game of the zombies in Game of Thrones, is because there you have one of the clearest, most explicit it almost like spells it out for you that this is not just about killing the people, right? So that the bad guy can have more undead soldiers. This is about the entire like death of civilization, death of culture. And like you said, it's not an accidental feature that civilization crumbles. That was the intention of this, big bad
Hmm.
guy of the
Yeah,
what's it
it's
called?
like
The
it's
something
agency.
king,
The
the
Night
Ice
King.
King, Night King. Thank you.
Ice
Yeah.
King is Adventure
So
Time.
I was gonna say, yeah, I was thinking, yeah, White Walkers. Yeah. Anyway, movie
Yeah, Night
they
King.
they start up in the ice. So okay.
Yeah,
Um.
that's another kind of it makes them kind of unique. Is they're all like frosty.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot
Yeah.
of frosty zombies.
Well, and you've got the whole like and obviously if it's like a parallel to kind of Northern Europe, England, and it's coming
Mhm.
down and all that stuff. But moving on. So, yeah, you have this
Wait for
like
the Game of
very
Thrones episode, Mike.
yeah, I try to bring that in as much as I can.
I know, the bingo
So
card is, on full display with Mike's Game of Thrones reference.
So so you've got this, like I said, this death of culture, slowly kind of creeping towards, and it does kind of speak to, if you want to see the sort of like Christian parallel. I mean, it's this apocalyptic where the old way is thrown off, and you could look at it in one of two ways. You could look at it as it's just a recycling or an actual renewal. And as you were kind of describing, when in some
Yeah,
of
this is
these
like the flood,
examples,
right? This is like Noah's flood
mhm,
in like,
yeah,
evil undead horde form.
and so it kind of brings us to well, I guess, what we kind of has gone through, like what does it teach us about humanity, when stripped away, when certain things are stripped away, who are we really, or what are we sort of left with? And you kind of get left with this sort of like fallen humanity versus redeemed humanity.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, sure.
that's what, in this case, the zombie story, maybe not entirely specifically, but in some ways the zombie story can really kind of highlight that, because of the unique human element that the zombie monster kind of brings forward. Um, I can even think of like in some of the there's some scenes in like The Walking Dead where people will actually start to use the zombies as almost like tools or almost like cattle or like livestock,
Well, there's yeah, so, like, Day of the Dead, the 3rd film in the Romero trilogy, well, it's not a trilogy, he made, like, 5 more later on, but, like, the big 3 that kinda capped off a trilogy and in the '80s, the 3rd one is about them being in a military bunker trying to harness zombies. So, most of humanity has turned into a zombie horde, the remaining people are in a military bunker full of scientists and soldiers, and they are trying to domesticate zombies. They want to like
Mm,
zombie power, right? Like what is
yeah.
that from? What is that
I
from? I want to harness Dune. That's where I'm getting
uh
that reference from. Uh desert power. If you've seen the new Dune movie, because I don't know if he talks like that in the book, but the new Dune movie that came out a couple years ago, they talk about harnessing desert power, which is to
mm,
say like the basically the Bedouin types, the people who live out in the desert. They want to harness
mhm,
them for their purposes. That's kind of what
sure.
they're trying to do with zombies. I make
Yeah, no,
connections.
so I mean, and so the last kind of, I guess, point, to sort of bring this all home is, you think of the idea of, well, it's the dead who are coming back to haunt us, right? And we can see this, we see it very physically and very violently in the zombie movies, but is there also this sort of parallel when we think of like, and GK Chesterton called tradition the democracy of the dead? And so you
Yeah.
think of, is this the dead coming back to haunt us, or we're paying for the sins of, our past ancestors or whatever? Is there a sort of element? I think like tradition is coming back to haunt us and consume us in the case of zombies. Is there a sort of parallel that we can, draw
A
upon or find or whatever?
constant folklore theme all over the world, constantly everywhere, is you have to respect the ancestors, right?
Mm,
And so basically, in a lot of pagan civilizations, there would be ancestor worship or ancestor appeasement, and we're talking like across all time and geography, right? This is like super basic
mm,
to human instinct. Where if you don't respect the dead, if you don't respect the ancestors that have gone before you, they will haunt you.
mm,
They will come back and they will become a vampire and eat you, or they'll
mm,
be a ghoul or a revenant, what we call a zombie, and eat you, or they will become a poltergeist and ghost around and like mess up your life and curse you, right? So
mm,
that's all rooted in this idea that what drove a lot of um, respect for the dead was a fear of the dead in a
mm,
lot of ways, right? And there's something there's something to that. As Christians, we have a notion of the saints. It's not the
mm.
same
Oh
thing as
yeah,
ancestor worship, but it
we
is.
both come from traditions, or well, I should say we come from traditions that honor tradition, right? That have always held, we even call it sacred, you might say, right? So
Right. Well,
it's
and so
very much, I mean,
we have kind of a positive inversion of this where like we love the dead, you know, like
mhm,
we pray to those who have slept, gone, because we in some sense we don't consider them dead, right? Like
mhm,
Christ says he's the God of the living, right? And so that's
mhm,
where the prayers for intercession comes from, right? But in regular parlance, yeah, they're dead. Like they've ceased this earthly coil, right?
mhm,
Um, and so we seek to be in communion with them because we know we can benefit from them. Um, that's not being afraid of the dead. But at the same time, we also know that we will be judged, like the saints will judge the world, right?
mhm,
And in some sense, when we are but at the end of time in the final judgments, there is going to be the sheep and the goats, right? And you're either going to be on the side judging the rest of humanity, or you're going to be a part of like humanity being judged by the saints, right?
mhm.
And I don't think that anyone should take that to mean like some kind of like
It's not a
jurisprudence, like a bunch of
vindictive,
people,
yeah.
yeah, a lot of people like
It's not a
finger
vindictive
wagging at
thing.
you from like a
Mhm,
tall balcony or something like that. But it is we have to respect. I mean, like the nexus of fear and love is like respect, right? And
mhm,
so we respect the fact that the dead have something to say to us, both literally at the end of time we
mhm,
will either be on this side or that side of like the conversation, right?
mhm.
Um, but also because they have the wisdom, they've lived the life, and
Yeah.
they
So we're
they're
convicted just by its presence. We're convicted by, when we hold
mhm,
up certain heroes or certain figures, we should be convicted to, of course, imitate, right, those same heroes
mhm,
in his or her virtues. And so that's where, in a sense, the tradition is there, but it's not haunting us. It's not trying to consume us. It is, like we see ourselves as a part of that same tradition. And just like we can look backwards on it, we then are, we're that same example in the next 40 years or the next 100 years looking back upon it. So it's seeing yourself in line with it, not as, like I said before, we try to put death in this box or put it in this corner and either forget about it or try to keep it sequestered, but it will inevitably keep creeping towards us, and it will
right.
become that object of fear, like the zombie always is.
The the idea that nowadays people judge the past, right? Instead of letting the past judge
Mm,
them, you know. There's been a turn from how we've lived historically, right? Where there's a
mm,
veneration for the dead, there's a veneration for the past. Within the last 100 years or so, there has been a kind of revolution, a kind of Jacobin revolution against the past, and it started not just in the 21st century. This has been happening for a long time now. But we're very much in an age of judging the past now. Like
kind of an
we've
enlightenment. It
hit the
seems like an
full
enlightenment sort of
nexus.
rooted
Yeah.
thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes technically. You could keep pushing it back to the Reformation, starting with its judgment against, like,
Oh yeah,
Catholic
shots
Christendom.
fired. He went there.
You know. But like, you could go further back than that. But like, anyway, like, really. But even then, I think that there's been the last 100 years have really like we've reached a plateau of
Mm,
disconnect from the past. And a
mm,
lot of people are afraid that the past is going to come back and bite us. Like this idea that we can utopian, recreate the world, tabula rasa. We don't have to think about where we came from. We don't have to think about who we are as people and what our traditions are, or what constitutes the human condition as such, that we can just like make it
mm.
up, kind of transhumanism, basically. Um,
Yeah.
you know, will that work, right? Have we do we not respect the dead well enough, and are they going to rise up and show us to be the monsters that we actually are?
Well,
It
and that's
works.
what I think, that is one of the, I think, the dangers when people are just starting to have this conversation about AI. And this isn't, this is just an aside, it's not another AI conversation, but
That's
it's
the
the idea that
Frankenstein
when
episode.
it's well, when it's taking that human, well, isn't a Frankenstein, isn't that just another zombie, right? Haven't we? Yeah,
He's
you
kind of like a
established
super
that
zombie.
already.
because he's like
It's
mini
the
corpses tied
it's
together.
the it's the mix of alchemy, science, and agency. But the whole AI thing is, what is the one of the big dangers is that because it's replacing the human element, right? This is the fear, is that when it replaces the human element, um, it's taking out something that will look very similar to it, but it will be missing that one thing. And this, again, it kind of takes us back to that uncanny valley where it's like
The
the
image of
zombies share
God,
a lot of,
you
it
know,
shares a
like
lot of, and what's it going to do though, is it's going to overrun, it's going to take over the culture, right? And that's, again, it's the death of the individual, it's the death of culture.
mhm,
This is the Night King. The Night King wanted to take out all that was alive,
right.
right? There'd be no culture, there'd be no story left, I think, is the line that
I'll
the
throw
show
another
uses.
I'll throw another really good zombie movie in there. Reanimator. This is another movie that is not very wholesome. So be warned. This is not a wholesome movie. But
As opposed to my Game of Thrones references.
well, I feel obligated to let people understand that we are not
You're so
necessarily talking about
responsible, Jacob.
movies that are I think we're going to be held responsible for all of our words, Mike. But like this is kind of a riff on Frankenstein's an H.P. Lovecraft character. The movie's not very much like the story, but it is a movie about Herbert West, who is a great character. The actor who plays him, I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, he's a classic villain, but he creates a zombie formula, and the rest of the movie is about him losing control of that zombie formula and things like that. Now, why I'm bringing up this topic though, or this movie, is that he thinks from his like scientific materialism that he can just bring back the dead and they'll be fine, immortality, eternal life, that type of a thing, right?
Mhm.
What happens when he brings back the dead though is they are monsters. They're zombies, as you think of. Like they're cannibalistic. They've lost the image of God. Like,
Mhm.
so in other words, this is that uncanny valley thing you're talking about. The presumption, the arrogance is that you can achieve eternal life or bringing people back from the dead and they'll still be human, right?
Yeah.
But God's the only one who can make humans and then bring humans back from the dead. Because even if we can go and bring humans back from the dead, quote unquote, they don't come back human. They are an uncanny valley-esque imitation. They are lumbering. They have the
It's
shape of humanity,
more than
but
just
they
the
are not
physical
human.
parts and what do you want to say, electricity that flows through us, so to speak, right?
Right.
The soul is something a
Exactly.
little bit different than, yes, it's the organizing principle of the
Well,
matter or
it's
the
tethered
form
to
of the
God
matter.
that makes it different. It's the connection to
Mm.
God that matters. And so if you bring back a human body, right, and it's not God who's living in that, like, who's animating that body, but some kind of
Mhm.
like mechanism that we have constructed, be it with electricity or alchemy or whatever,
Yeah.
radiation, you know, slime, you name it. There's so many different options out there. All you're doing is animating tissue, right?
Well, and
You're
you're
not you're not
it's
making humans. You're animating tissue.
and yeah, to put it like even more like, I guess, overt, like you're reanimating the dead, and not just in the functional sense, but it's like the thing is not just functionally dead, but I guess you'd say ontologically dead. Like it is
Mhm.
just death walking around. And that,
Yep.
again, that's what that's why zombies are scary. It's
Yeah.
death that follows you. It's death that is trying to
That's
consume
why
you.
Easter is not Happy Zombie Day or whatever
Oh yeah,
the
I know.
smart alecky meme
That
is.
stupid
Yeah,
meme. Yeah.
I know, terrible. Um, it's this is a divine act. The human
Mhm.
life is a divine act. And so yeah, you can take a human body and you can turn it into something else, but you can't turn it into a human again once it's died.
Mhm.
God has to do that. That's up to Jesus. But what makes the zombie phenomenon, the reason why it's so popular, it's because it's so versatile. If you go back through
Mhm.
this conversation we just had, we've kind of covered so many different angles in this,
Yeah,
and
and
it's
actually
because there's
in
that many angles to
directions I wasn't
cover.
expecting too. So I thought it was, I mean, I do like
No,
that,
it's a
we've gone to,
the zombie is the
and you
the
thought we'd have nothing
absolutely
new to add to this. You're like, "Oh,
Hey,
zombies have been done before."
the only reason I agreed to it is because I know that we have the edge of your seat take. What is it?
The
The
hot
hip
take, the
new
spicy
thing. The
take,
hot yeah,
the
something better than what I just said. You got it. We got the hot take on this stuff, Mike.
yeah,
We know
apparently.
we got angles that people don't even know exist. But
Mhm.
the zombie is a modern this zombie figure, the zombie monster is the most modern monster, right?
Mm.
Ghost,
Okay, yeah,
vampires, all these things have been around
sure,
forever.
yeah.
Kaiju, even giant monsters, to some extent, you could think of like them being around forever. Zombies, as we've constructed them, post George Romero,
Mm.
this is modern man making fables about modern humanity.
No, I know, that's yeah.
Every single zombie thing you've ever seen, this is a modern conversation using a
Mhm.
horror trope like the zombie to comment on
Well
ourselves. And just like you can, if I say let's have a conversation about humanity, well, there's a million different conversations you can have with that kind of
mhm.
header. There's a million different zombie
It kinda
tropes.
reminds me of actually, so I know I've given a G.K. Chesterton quote about tradition already, but he has this other quote where it's like ironically, the most obvious, dogma of Christianity, the one that you don't even need a Bible for, you just need today's newspaper for, is original sin. And it kinda
Mm,
reminds me of this thought that I've had, after a couple of TV shows that I've watched or movies that I've watched where it's like, Hollywood actually gets its own depravity. It gets its own, um sense of excess or gets its own
yeah,
original sin really, really well. It doesn't know that it's original sin, and it doesn't know what the answer is, right? Doesn't know where the redemption lies. See, there's your title right there. Brain Dead Redemption. So it
nice.
gets it really well. And the zombie story is like you're saying, it's the perfect conviction of humanity. It's humanity's
Yeah, of
conviction of
sin.
humanity,
Whether
or
it's
modern
talking to
humanity, I
the
should
we're the
say.
monsters or the
Yeah.
monsters are us, it's always
Yeah.
talking about the monster, right?
But and actually, and
Yeah,
like I said, I think I want us to do that in a separate conversation where it's like Hollywood gets its own original sin. But I think, like you've kind of touched on, the zombies are a really good example of that. And so, as we're not only finishing up the Halloween, the October, it's actually bringing us into the All Saints Day, All Souls Day, prayers for the dead, or the month praying for the dead. The zombie story is kind of a perfect transition between monsters and, you know, the redemption of the dead. So
we are going to do vampires next, though.
no, vampires are coming before this, Jacob. This is
Nope,
going to be after
nope,
vampires.
no, I know that's what
Vampires
you're
are going to
trying to
be.
do. This is gonna lead into our vampire conversation. The vampire
Ugh,
conversation is gonna lead into our Dracula conversation,
bring
and
everybody
then we
behind
can
the
go then we can go into
vampires are the precursor to zombies. We got to do vampires, then zombies, and
no,
then we
no, no,
go
no, no.
into.
Revenants are the precursors to vampires. I have this mapped out.
Oh
All right,
gosh, I
audience,
can't
we're
wait.
gonna
I'm
find
so I'm
out.
so
We're
glad
gonna
this is
find out who
visual.
wins. We're gonna find out who wins this argument based upon what episodes drop in what
Yeah,
order.
apparently, yeah.
Yeah, but
Thanks for giving everybody that look behind the veil. Now, with that actually brings us to our conclusion. I was trying to wrap us up neatly, and then you get us down this whole new argument, as usual. Thanks, everybody, for coming to listen to this episode. Well, if you want to call it an episode or just a little tiff between Jacob and I of the Voyage podcast. And just want to keep encouraging you guys to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, positive review. So that it doesn't come back to haunt us, that it does come back and we can celebrate the past episodes of this show. How's that?
send more lies.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.